Hello everyone, and thanks for joining and to listen to this talk on extending accessibility to mobile in Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. My name is Alexis Denançay. I have been working in the industry for almost 15 years in both production and now as a game content director. I joined Ubisoft Da Nang in central Vietnam when the studio opened 5 years ago. In the studio, we worked on various platforms and formats such as Ubisoft Nano, arcade web games, Valiant Hearts Coming Home, which we ported to PC and consoles, Rabbids Legends of the Multiverse, an original game for Apple Arcade, Skull and Bones in co-development with other studios in Ubisoft, and of course, why we're here today, the Mac and mostly mobile porting of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. As you can see, I worked on both mobile and PC and console games. Having both perspectives helped me a lot for this kind of porting. I also want to say that I'm not an accessibility expert. However, this is something that I really wanted to push for this porting, both to honor the work done on the consoles version and because it is what the mobile platform needed, quite simply. Of course, all of this project will not exist, fantastic teams behind it, so I want to thank the whole team in Ubisoft Da Nang for their dedication and the team in Montpellier for crafting this amazing game. Without them, this could not have happened. So what are we going to talk about today? How to approach accessibility in a porting project, especially with demanding controls and on mobile, which leads to particular challenges. And we will also present practically a lot of the solutions and features we put in place to make the game comfortable for mobile players. For those who don't know it, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is a Metroidvania, more in details, an action-adventure platformer. It was released last year in January 2024, and it had a big focus on accessibility, being accessible by design. For more details on that aspect, I will send you back for the excellent talk of last year from Rémi Boutin that explains all the strategies that they put in place to reinforce accessibility on the title. Just to give you an overview of the accessibility focus for The Lost Crown they had, their main axes were reducing the Metroidvania cognitive load, specifically on a map with the memory shards feature. It allows you to take screenshots of any place in the game and pin it to the map automatically. This feature personally convinced me to play Metroidvanias, and I'm convinced that it will be a staple of the genre in the future. A ton of difficulty parameters for players to customize their experience, impacting the way the game is played, amount of information on screen, and generally difficulty settings. And dedicated features such as high contrast, very helpful for vision impaired players. On our side, as we focused on the mobile-only side, we focused on controls in the cognitive load and to tweak the difficulty parameters. With all of these efforts, the game went on to win plenty of awards in accessibility. Best Cognitive Accessibility and Greatest Accessibility Innovation at the Game Accessibility Conference last year, Innovation in Accessibility at the Game Awards, and Best Accessibility at Les Pégases, which is a French video game recognition award. But also many other nominations and awards won. To us in Da Nang, it means that it was an extra honor and motivation to work on this title, but it also represented extra pressure to release a great mobile porting, which we hope we live up to. This is a big legacy we have to uphold on the porting, but really we could not have done it without the direct guidance and support of the HD team. First off, they give us a really great starting base, as the game used the Nintendo Switch as their main platform, which meant that they worked on smaller screen and menus and text were adapted and big already, which is a great step forward for smartphones. But it also meant that the game was optimized to run at 60 FPS on a 4GB RAM device. And generally, all of these efforts in accessibility meant that in a lot of cases, we just had to adjust existing parameters on well-tagged and organized game data. Then, during pre-production and production, we were lucky enough to benefit from their support and guidance in knowing the ins and outs of the game, discussing potential features that could echo problematics they faced, technical supporting from production, and reviews and validation of our feature for the most expert persons on the game, the original creators. We also benefited from the support of our HQ in Paris to drive the project and propose additional features. So again, thanks everyone involved on making this project happen. Let's dive in our pre-production, which is mostly research on our upcoming challenges. As it is a porting project, the scope should be pretty straightforward and predictable, so it is key to define very well the problematic from the start. Looking at it at high level, we started from a polished, strong base with a lot of customization built in. It's great news for us, as we stated before. So we know we need to identify the challenges specific to mobile, propose solutions to answer those challenges, and make sure the playtest during production confirm the features proposed are indeed helpful. By following these principles, we managed to define about 80% of our accessibility features before even onboarding the full team, as it was part of our mandate when we validated the project. The rest was either refined along the way, discoveries from playtest, or even simply ideas we did not have from the beginning. It's important to leave room for this as well. Our mission was self-appointed and part of our original proposition. We knew we wanted to bring Prince of Persia's Lost Crown to mobile audiences with no quality downgrade, meaning in gameplay comfort, content, but also visually, and keeping the game at 60 FPS on most mobile phones. Best-in-class native mobile controls. With an elaborate gameplay, this was clearly the most obvious challenge for us. Controller support, as we wanted this port to give the option to get the exact same experience as on PC and console. And dedicated accessibility features to really adapt the game to mobile as opposed to a simple port. To us, all of these conditions were the mandatory conditions so the players could enjoy a great experience on mobile. In practice, what did we face? Let's look at the obvious. The Lost Crown makes full use of the controller, meaning 15 buttons, not counting combos. That we needed to adapt to a flat surface without trigger and a small screen that needed to display this control, which represents an extra challenge on the density of controls. Looking at it much more in detail, we have challenges that both came from the mobile platform itself and others that are particular to the game and game genre. From the mobile side, the quantity of controls on screen is a challenge. Touchscreens cannot give you a physical feedback, as the trigger resistance or the joystick hitting its limit. And something that we easily forget, most players on mobile play without sound, limiting the immersion and some features. On the platforming side, the pass or fail nature of platforming means that any input you miss will lead to death and potentially frustration. Generally speaking, platforming has a music to it, rhythmic input you need to perform, which is harder with no physical button, a high pace, and a lot of different skills to use from the character. And the endgame and optional sections are particularly challenging, and there is not much parameters you can impact to ease that challenge. On combat side, it's generally more forgiving than platforming. However, we knew the extent of work that went into the Lost Crown, allowing you to perform long and impressive combos. We wanted the players to be able to reproduce those on mobile as well. All of this wrapped makes for a lot of possible customization. One point here is to give players a lot of options, but not to overwhelm them, so we paid great attention into how the features would be introduced to the players. Now let's look at how we adapted controls from the more traditional ways to the full customization we wanted to give to the players. Starting with controller support. It is an optional feature for the game on mobile, of course, as the primary way of playing is with touch controls. It is, however, a great way to offer players the exact same experience as on PC and consoles. So it was really an obvious choice for us to keep. It's worth noting that even on mobile, it's a standard to support controller, as all these games that you have seen have it. We had to support double display, which in our case meant to only develop the touch layer and make sure we didn't break the existing layer for controller. Finally, what we found out in playtest was that players were genuinely asking for this feature. In our first playtest, it was a feature already supported, but never advertised to the player. Many requested the feature in this playtest, and it was already present. We even had one player simply trying to plug his controller to discover that it worked. So all in all, informing players early is something that you need to do to ensure that most people who want to use the feature will actually be able to use it. Now the heart of the issue here are touch controls. Here you can see comparison between our very first mockup and the final result. From first glance, they look pretty similar, but there is a lot of changes that happen. So what changed in between them? Some input types completely change. Size and position of the buttons evolved a lot, very iteratively, from playtesting both internally and externally. We tried to declutter the screen to keep the action readable. And something we cannot see on screen, we worked a lot on the button feedback when used. It's worth noting also that all the layout you see here on screen is the layout for endgame, which seems intimidating at first, but as a Metroidvania, you will start with much less skills, which means less buttons on screen, and a much more easy adaptation for the players. And progressive unlock means that the challenge grows progressively. As controls customization was part of our mission, we went beyond providing simple buttons, for instance with the dash. Of course, we offer the most intuitive option and the closest to a console experience, meaning a button on screen. But we also added an option to use a swipe movement to dash. Using those native mobile touch controls is something that we found out very helpful into proposing alternatives for the player. Taking another example with one of Sargon's time power, Clairvoyance. It is essentially a toggle that allows you to switch between dimensions, as you can see here. So we propose a button with two status, clarifying the state of the power. This is what I meant by button feedback. And as an alternative, we propose a double tap input under the movement area, which has the benefit of removing one button from the screen and requires less precision when you need to quickly switch between buttons. We had more debates around the Atra special abilities that are devastating attacks with a special mechanic. On HD, these attacks are performed by holding two buttons, parry and either melee or range attack. We preserve this method for players who are used to this control and propose two other alternatives. A dynamic HUD element, in which you swipe to trigger the Atra attack, and what ended up being our default option, transforming the HUD in a touch zone that you can simply tap to trigger. It is an option that you can change, of course, anytime. Transforming the HUD into a button means also that it needs to be slightly out of the way, as the HUD is usually located on the side of the screen. Here, considering it's an action that you don't perform very often, it is an acceptable solution. For more frequent action, it's much more complex to decide to put it on the sides of the screen in areas that are less accessible to players. Then, beyond changing the inputs, we looked at where we could simplify or even remove controls by making them automatic. We introduced Auto Potion that triggers when the player health is low. Auto Parry, that was a particular challenge, as you need to be able to parry anytime, even when moving and jumping around, keeping already two of your fingers busy. We ended up proposing an option that will parry if you have no touch input on the screen on the exact frame where Sargon gets it, and of course if the attack is an attack that Sargon can parry already. And finally, to ease combat, we added an auto-hit feature that will trigger the melee attack when close to an enemy. You will still be able to use direction and other skills to perform devastating combos, but it's removing a few of your inputs, which is the most frequent one, melee attack. It's worth noting that both auto potion and auto parry remove one button from the screen, helping to clear the action. With all these extensive functions, and even considering the ones that we explored but they needed not shipping, what we learned is that you need to test a lot of options. And ultimately, you still need to propose a default option to players. What we found out in there is that you need to try bold options first, such as using swipe moves, screen borders, or no input at all, like on auto parry. Trying them first means that you don't rely solely on it will work as a button, which can bring tremendous improvements and not be necessarily the obvious first choice. Don't be afraid to multiply options, especially if you intend to keep options open to the player. Different players will have different preferences, and it's great to cater to all players. And of course, playtesting is a great source of learning. We refined a lot the default controls, but also their position and size on screen. We saw, for instance, that most of our important controls were jump, dash, and melee, and they deserve bigger and more convenient buttons. We also noticed that players missing the buttons in playtest, so all buttons were made slightly bigger to avoid this. Finally, we saw that this triangle of inputs needs to stay close to each other so that it's easy to switch between those very key actions that are the most repeated ones. Finally, something to not neglect if you're going to keep a lot of options open to your players is that you will need to adapt all of your tutorials multiple times and make sure that they're compatible with the selected setup by your player. So now that we have a ton of options for players to choose from, how to give them access to try various options and to do it in a way that is not overwhelming for players. Well, for this, we built a controls customization feature accessible anytime from the pause menu. It includes a gym to test your controls with platforms and one enemy. This particular scene also allows the player to practice moves and test out the controls in a safe environment. We also provided free profiles so that the player can test different setups and alternate between them very quickly. We saw some players were, for instance, making a setup for platforming and another one for combat. Looking at it more closely, for any button, you can change their size, position, and transparency. We discovered in playtest that some players hold their phones very differently than what you would expect, making this feature very useful to them. And so they had a lot of fun playing interactively with those changes. You can also change input methods when an alternative is available, here seen with the player movement, where the alternative pad is also customizable in shape very extensively. And more generally, you can activate any accessibility option we introduced from this feature directly. Once we had our full set of controls and controls customization, we sent a build to Montpellier in the fall of 2024. What they gave us was the best confirmation we could ask for. One of their developers, Matthew Isidore, who was the GPP responsible of 3Cs on the game, sent us back this video of his favorite combo, proving that the game controls were ready to execute even the most complex action in the game. I'll let you enjoy the combo until the end. And as a side note, we also did similar tests on all the platforming sections to ensure that even the most difficult sections were performed easily with touch controls. There's not only a work on controls we needed to do, but we also went into additional features to control the level of challenge. First off, we looked at visual cues we could add. To compensate the lack of physical feedback, we added an arrow around Sargon at all times. This helped both to know where your finger is and generally offers better precision. It's also something you can turn off manually, but it will be on by default on all profiles. Mobile players, mostly playing without audio, also required few visual feedback to replace audio when it was necessary. Here seen with the pulse around the Prosperity Bird amulet, which indicates the location of a treasure. Then we looked at what rules we could change on the player movement to make platforming easier. It's worth noting that we also had the constraint of not breaking the existing gameplay. So we ended up with two adjustments. Wall grab hold, that allows you to control when you can slide from walls, allowing for safe breaks in long platforming sequence. You can still slide down manually. Double air dash, proposing an additional dash without touching the ground. This is particularly tricky in a Metroidvania when you don't want players to access locked areas matching with their progression. Both of these features are off by default to preserve the original game experience, but will help few players that struggle in some particular areas of the game. As it is a Prince of Persia game, it allowed us to play with time and how we bend it. The HD version already introduced a few specific slow motion uses in the controls. We looked into extending those to make them comfortable to mobile players. These are tiny changes, hard to notice, but they end up making a difference when you encounter those particular moments. And then there's what we call Time Lord, a major optional feature suggested by Montpellier, where we can slow down time to 75%. This gives the player a larger reaction time between inputs, which is very helpful when buttons are not physical and generally helps lower the challenge both for platforming and combat in anything that is a bit time sensitive. Finally, we brought back a feature similar to what you could find in Rayman Origins or Legends, other great platforming games from Montpellier. It plays around the number of times Sargon dies on the same soft respawn point. After 5 consecutive deaths, we offer the player a shield as a pickup item, which grants 1 hint of invincibility. We made sure in our design to introduce visual feedback compatible with colorblind players, with the shield icon in addition to the HP bar color change and the VFX around Sargon. We found that this can make a huge difference in those pass or fail moments, as you have one chance for a mistake and to recover from it. To further guide players, we also added extra hint after 10 deaths to give the message to the player suggesting to explore other accessibility and difficulty options. And after 30 days, we leverage a feature from HD, the platforming assist, that will open an optional portal allowing you to skip an entire level. There are a lot of parameters and options, even more now on mobile. This should be considered for the player, as we needed to make their life simple by proposing clear choices. We used the existing profiles in HD, using minor tweaks adapted for mobile, such as the multi-directional parry option that is on for every player on the platform by default. In difficulty option, we added one profile targeted specifically for mobile that we call Fighter. This allowed to preserve the existing profiles for players who want the exact same experience as on consoles, or for instance, players who would play with a controller. Finally, we added few options of our own, such as the boss HP, again a suggestion from our collaboration with Rémi Boutin. This really helped, as it was revealed in playtest, bosses represent an additional challenge requiring more precision in combat than regular enemies, and needed specific adjustments for mobile. All in all, as a developer, we saw that too many options could really become overwhelming for players. At the same time, players need to be informed about the existence of the features your team worked hard to develop. The compromise we found was to communicate with the player early and in obvious ways. We proposed an additional controls playstyle screen that matched three profiles. Those who want the same experience as on PC and consoles, even better when played with the controller. Or recommended setup for mobile, with few adjustments and low automation. And finally, a more casual profile, using auto potion, auto parry, and slowing down time to 90% by default. It's worth noting that some of the features we added to the game are never proposed by default, even for the most casual profile. We also pushed a control reminder before playing that gives players the access to controls customization, giving this feature more visibility and enhancing the chance that players will use it. And we took the opportunity of the news feature already present to add specific message for players, targeting our controls and accessibility feature. All things considered, we hope that all players will see those and that they will know how to use them and when to use them if necessary to their own experience. Wrapping up this talk with a lesson learned. For game porting from PC and consoles to mobile, accessible design is great design. On complex games that you want to bring to mobile, this is answering the needs for most players and must be part of our plan, especially if you want to reach large audiences. Following a classic production pipeline, but worth reminding because it's always useful, you need to study your challenges and particularities early, looking at the concurrence on both mobile and PC and consoles. Some accessibility features were straight up inspired by other games we saw on the market. Draft your plan according to these challenges. Iterate a lot, leverage playtests to refine your features. And finally, if possible for your team, keep the original team involved. You will never find people that are more experts and passionate about the game than they are, and it is an extremely valuable resource to get an opinion on your game. Funny enough, today, April 14th, marks the release of the game on both App Store and Google Play. I invite you all to download the game and try out the features mentioned in this talk in the free trial of the game that is giving you the introduction of the first 20 minutes, for instance. We really hope this sneak peek will allow you and future players to see all the love put in this adaptation. Thank you for your time. I hope this was useful for you. I want to thank again the full team in Da Nang that make this amazing porting, Montpellier's team for their unwavering support, and everyone who helped in preparing this presentation. Thank you.